In this video, I want to talk about leaving room for self-evaluation for our children in the earliest childhood education. It applies to older kids in grade schools, but I'm specifically thinking about how we can help our kids self-evaluate even at the earliest ages. And not really teaching them to self-evaluate, more like allowing them to self-evaluate. And a lot of it has to do with our dialogue, the way we talk with our kids. So what does self-evaluation really look like? It's, I think it looks like experiencing the consequences of choices. And that's not exactly what it may sound like. It's more like when I let go of something, it falls. I mean, there's a consequence to that choice of choosing to let go of something and letting them experience a lot of those within reason. Letting them plan and experiment with the things that they want to do. Thinking and letting them think and reflect on feedback from the activity itself, and then some freedom from our own accolades. We're tempted to say things like "good job" and "way to go," and we kind of rob them of that ability to self-evaluate when we do that for them. And here's, I think, another good example of it.
It's a mulch.
So in this video, this child is allowed to experience the consequences of the choices. They decide they want to do something, they do it, and they can experience the cause and effect of what happens there. And there's no sort of empty praise like "good job," and I think we want to think purposefully about what those kinds of things actually mean to our kids and how they affect them. Now, our children can self-evaluate. I think they really need three things that I want to talk about. They need time, they need information from their environment, but they also need information from adults. It's important that that information does not have any judgment that's attached to it. I'll dig into that a little bit later. And then freedom to pursue things that interest them. So let's talk about, we'll actually put them out of order, that information without judgment. The way that we talk to our children becomes a big part of how they talk to themselves. We can inform the child about their actions without making a character judgment. We can, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. And then even a positive judgment. I mean, it sounds silly to some people, but even to say "good job," that's still a judgment. We might think, well, that's a positive thing to say. But I think there's some really interesting things that can happen there when we say "good job." Does that mean that anytime that we don't say "good job," that they haven't done a good job? I think we can accidentally send some messages there, and it gets in the way of them thinking about what kind of job they did. If my 3.5-year-old makes a painting and I say, "that's a great painting," then all of a sudden I've put in his mind, this is what a great painting looks like. So he may have thought, "I don't really like this yet," and he wanted to make some changes. But I've sort of robbed him of that. I've said, no, it's okay the way it is. And self-evaluation is all about looking at our own work both from Glasser's perspective and from Deming's perspective. It's about looking at our own work and deciding if it meets our own quality standards. So when we give our information with judgment, we rob our students of that ability to sort of make that judgment themselves. We rob them of the opportunity to do that. And so that's really important as we talk with them, is to make sure that we try to give them information without trying to add anything to that. And that's a very tough skill. It takes a lot of practice, I think, being able to observe a student engaged or a child engaged in self-directed learning and not try to give them some sort of encouraging feedback. But I think it's really important if we want to really encourage our kids to evaluate their own choices. We have to be willing to give them the information they need without attaching judgment to it. So a really good example is, or a few examples that I can share, is when my 20-month-old brings something to me, I do what Janet Lansbury calls sports casting, and I just, and I think actually the term goes back to Magda Gerber, but Janet Lansbury is the writer that I learned it from. And, you know, she may bring a truck to me and I say, "You've got a truck." And I might be tempted to say, you know, because she's kind of happy, I might be tempted to say, "Good job bringing me this truck," or "Thank you," but she may not actually be giving it to me. So it doesn't make sense to say thank you in that scenario. But it does make sense to at least acknowledge what I can see that she's doing, and is that she has a truck and maybe she's showing it to me. Or like the example of the painting, you know, my son puts a bunch of paint down on a piece of paper, and I say, "You really like using a lot of paint." So I'm not judging that decision. I'm just stating the facts. I'm kind of like I'm commenting on a sports game. I'm just stating what's happening, and so that gives them time to really think about, is that what I wanted to do? I'm just giving them some information. And on the more negative side, if a child, you know, makes a mess with a bunch of toys or something, and they kind of look to you like, "What are you going to say about this?" I can say, "You really wanted to make a mess." And then if I want to go a step further, if they're not ready to clean it up, but I am, I might go a step further and say, "Well, this is something that I'm not going to let just sit here. So I'm going to help you clean it up." And, you know, based on your approach to children and your approach, you may feel comfortable trying to get them to help you, or you may feel comfortable just showing them, "This is how I clean a mess up." And I think all forms of that can be pretty acceptable. It's the key is you're not necessarily attaching a judgment to that observation. You're trying to let them do that as often as possible. So the second thing that I think our kids need to self-evaluate is time. And I'm going to hide this video camera again. They need time to focus on what they're doing. They need time to process what others are saying to them. And they need time to think about what they want. So here's a video of a child playing with some pipes, and just given the time, you might hear a little bit of feedback, but you won't really hear any judgment about what he's doing. You'll just hear kind of some sports casting.
I got pie. I got pie. I'm getting my pipes all set up. I'm getting my pipes set up.
I see that.
maybe she's trying to say Z. Z. What? Oh, yeah. Z.
Hi, Anna.
So in that video, the child is really allowed to just explore this. There wasn't any accolades, and there wasn't any, well, try this and try that and do this. And there was a lot of time to just think about what did he want the pipes to do. And he wasn't distracted into, oh, check this out or try this or do this. He was allowed to just process those things. And so he's allowed to self-evaluate when he hits those, he tries to put the pipes together in a certain way and it doesn't work. He's allowed to experience that. The last thing I think that our kids need is freedom to pursue interests. I think people are more likely to honestly self-evaluate. We might evaluate our own choices if we can't choose what we're doing, but we're more likely to honestly self-evaluate our choices when we wanted to make those choices in the first place. I think they need to be able to decide how they want to play with something. If they want to take something that doesn't roll and try to roll it, I think they should be allowed to experiment with that. And many parents and educators step in a little too early and try to show them how something is played with. And you really rob them of finding their own fun in it. It may be, we have a set of bells that we let our kids play with, and it could be that we decide we want to teach them how to play the bells with these mallets, but we don't necessarily need to do that. Maybe for a while they just want to feel the texture and the coolness of the mallets, and they want to just look at it. And if they're entertained by that, why would I want to rob them of that? And then the last part of that is freedom to engage in an activity as long as and no longer than it holds their interest. So I'm not going to make my child do something longer than they want to do it, unless it's something that I need done. And we're talking mostly about play here. But I'm also not going to stop a child from pursuing something if, my 20-month-old, if she wants to roll a ball against the wall 300 times, I'm not going to stop that. Why would I stop that? She's obviously not done exploring. She doesn't feel comfortable with everything that ball can do when it hits the wall. When she's done evaluating her interest in that ball, then she'll give up on the activity enough. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't stop the activity if we need to go somewhere, or if there's something that I need to do. But I'm not going to do it. I'm never going to do it to try to encourage them to learn more than they're already learning, because they're already learning as much, I think, as they're ever going to learn from themselves. And as they get older, when they've had time to pursue that, then I think they're going to have more interesting questions to ask us when we can really teach them. So I don't have a video example of this, but I do have just a few snapshots of our kids playing in this little puddle that they create with the hose. There's a rope, there's a truck, and they're just kind of messing around with it, and they're getting dirty. And over here she's just playing in the sand. Now there's some boundaries there. She can't put it in her mouth. She can't throw it. She can drop it or pour it on the ground, things like that. And everyone, I think, has different boundaries as far as that goes. And then we see our son here playing with paint. So we've allowed him to use craft sticks or popsicle sticks, whatever you call them, to paint with. We allow him to use his fingers, or we also give him a brush. And we've taught him how to use those things. And he seems to really enjoy that. And sometimes he'll spend 2 hours painting. That may be hard to believe for a 3.5-year-old, but sometimes he spends up to that long painting, and sometimes it's just 10-15 minutes. He's kind of gotten out of it what he's wanted to. But if I took the time to direct all these activities, I would have never thought to have
Mm-hmm.
my kids like just go and drive their trucks in this puddle up here. I would have, it wouldn't have occurred to me, but it's something that occurred to them, and they explored that environment for probably a good 45 minutes before they were done with it. And so allowing them to focus, allowing them to have some information about what they're doing so that they can interpret their actions, and allowing them to pursue their own interests, I think sets up a very good environment that they are able to learn how to self-evaluate and learn how to, if we go back to that second slide, they learn how to learn from the consequences. They experiment and they find out what it is they truly want out of their activities. They have the time to think and reflect on what's happening, and then they decide what quality and what's fun. They learn how to decide those, so they become very confident in what they want. Well, thanks for listening. This was a presentation that I'm doing for a certification through the William Glasser Institute, and I'm very excited to share this with a group, and just wanted to post this online too, to kind of give myself some practice presenting it, and I hope you found it helpful. Thank you.